All right, the next panel is going to be wonderful. It's called Driving Innovation Across the Ecosystem. Sam, you're on stage, sir.
All right, can I get our panel up here to join me? Nope, wherever. No, I think we're all
Your
good.
mic, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, thanks everybody for sticking around. I know we're keeping you from refreshments in a little bit, but I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation here with this panel. I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad. I'm a principal analyst with Guidehouse Insights and a senior contributor at Forbes. And joining me today, have each of you give a quick intro to yourselves, starting with Robin Marquis.
All right, good evening, everyone. And we are very aware we're standing between you and the happy hour after this, so hopefully you'll stay engaged for the next half hour, and then we get to celebrate after. Robin Marquis, I lead the Innovative Mobility team at CalSTART. It's a nonprofit focused on clean transportation. A lot of my colleagues are on the ZEV transition side, and I do a lot more in the mobility ecosystem that we're going to talk about today.
All right, fantastic. I always thought they should have just combined this session with happy hour, and that could bring more people into the session. But thanks all for being here. I'm Andrew Glass Hastings. I'm the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation. And the OMF, as it's known, is an international nonprofit public-private partnership working to bring cities together with technology companies and mobility operators to co-create open source data standards and tools that cities use to manage shared mobility in public space. Talk a little bit more of that over the course of the next little bit here. I'll pass it on to Steve.
Great. Well, Sam, thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much. And thanks to the MOVE folks. I know there's a lot of effort to put these things on. Steve Greenfield out of Atlanta, Georgia. We're an early stage VC focused globally on mobility, focused as early as possible. So seed stage, and we invest in anything mobility related, everything from robotic arms that change tires on vehicles to software that automates processes. We'll look at drones, space, marine, what have you. So we've made 25 investments now out of 2 funds over the last 3 years.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Neil Brooker, I'm with BMW DesignWorks. BMW DesignWorks is BMW Group's design, but we operate outside of Munich, so we operate as a consultancy. About 50% of what we're doing is working for the BMW Group across the whole brand portfolio, introducing new products, and then the other part is actually as a consultancy. We work with brands like John Deere. We've done charging stations for Ionity, but work primarily across the system of mobility and digital together and come up with new ideas, new concepts.
All right, so we're talking about driving innovation, but the key word here in this title is ecosystem. With whether we're talking about electrification, automation, none of these technologies exist in isolation. And it's not going to be enough to simply do a one-for-one replacement of every internal combustion vehicle with an electric vehicle or a human-driven vehicle with an automated vehicle. There needs to be an entire ecosystem that supports this for it to be successful. And there's a lot of things that we need to do both to make mobility more accessible to everyone, affordable, and efficient and more environmentally friendly. So I'd like to hear from each of you. What do you think that this ecosystem for mobility in the future is going to look like, or what should it look like?
Do you want me to start?
Go for it.
Okay. That's the downside of being right next to the moderator is like, then everyone else goes, yeah, what they said. Actually, I think Sarah in the previous session had a lot of great insights about how they're operating in North Carolina and the multiple modes and this concept of kind of carefree or seamless mobility for all. I think one of the challenges right now is that things are very disjointed, and I know OMF does a lot to try to, get things on the same standards and improve operations for cities. So from a traveler perspective, I think there's the future that I would love to see is one that puts the tools and the power back into the traveler's hands in how they plan, what modes they take, making it an experience that's not just, okay, I need to go A to B on mode A, B to C on mode B, so I need 3 apps, 2 tickets. It's a very clunky and not great experience. It's not very convenient or inviting. So more solutions that make it easier to just stitch those together and make it more seamless would really help this become an ecosystem and not just a bunch of parts, but really a sum that makes it easier to ditch your car or not use your car for that trip, or maybe a car is part of that trip, but it helps you connect to other modes.
Yeah, a lot of the promise of this ecosystem, Sam, that you pointed out, is a safer, greener, more equitable urban transportation system. And I think a common thread through that is digitization. And yet we have set cities. I'm going to offer this from the city perspective. We work with cities, here in North America and across Europe. We've put cities in the position of managing our transportation systems. Like everything kind of becomes very local, and there can be kind of federal or state regulations or requirements, but it comes down to actually managing the street lights, or managing the curb, or managing the mobility within the street. We've said cities are responsible for doing that. But cities are some of the kind of least equipped agencies to actually manage this evolving ecosystem towards digitization. And so a lot of it, in terms of looking down into the future of kind of that state of the future ecosystem, it's giving cities the tools and the capacity to be able to manage that digitization of transportation. And whether it's digital infrastructure, we talk about that kind of phrase a lot, or just the capacity to be able to have the common language so that cities aren't doing it differently, so that there's a commonality between, city here in Austin or Los Angeles or Amsterdam or Paris, that they have a common language. And so that when they're thinking about managing this digital mobility and digital infrastructure, whether that's shared mobility or public space, they're doing it in a way that is, they're all speaking the same language.
It's great points and great question, Sam. So, managing a 10-year fund, you necessarily sort of have to have a top-down view and a thesis around how these trends are going to evolve. But at the same time, we're consistently seeing 50 to 60 companies a month that we talk to inbound that are looking to get funded at the early stage. So it's interesting to kind of look at sort of the trend of where folks are innovating globally. And we've seen much more interest in the last 12 months around electrification, as you can imagine, not only for automobiles, but a lot of like micromobility, two-wheel vehicles, battery technologies, et cetera. But you can really kind of see when you get in that volume of inbound interest from entrepreneurs, see where they're innovating. And there is a lot sort of in connectivity of cities, trying to identify things as simple as which parking spaces are available at certain hours. And there are hardware components and software components to that as well. And it's very hard businesses to build, but clearly there's an interest by the innovators themselves, the entrepreneurs, in innovating new solutions to these problems.
Okay, I guess I'll pick it up from here. I'm coming more from the customer experience or the user experience point of view, being in the design industry as we are. Essentially, I think, and we use this phrase, charging habits means changing habits. That's what we've got to remember, that you're asking the end user to actually get out of something, and you think about the car, exactly. And Robin, I think you and I probably disagree on this because you want to get rid of the cars, but I don't.
I don't want to get rid of them completely, just maybe not be the only option.
Right. But in essence, I mean, the car has been embedded in our psyche, in our culture for the past 100 years in the US. We're asking our customers a lot to get out of cars, not just BMW customers, but all customers, right? So to ask them to do that, you can't ask them to take a negative step back from what they already have. We've got to think about the charging experience itself and say, what are we going to do with these people? This is a chance to add value to the experience of owning a car, not take away from it. Yeah. Right now, the problem we have is we've gone from range anxiety to charging anxiety. Mm-hmm. And it's not just the end user that's got charge anxiety, it's the OEMs. We're sitting here saying, you know what, we made a bet 5 years ago that we've got to bring electric vehicles. We were told we had to bring electric vehicles to the marketplace. But what we're seeing is that the necessary charging infrastructure and the experiences that people are having when they're charging their vehicles isn't really supporting the volumes that we're trying to get to. So we have a bit of an issue here and a bit of a catch-up that we've got to get through to get that ecosystem into a place where we can get mass adoption of electric vehicles.
So continuing, well, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to, sorry. I mean, mostly just speaking from my own recent personal experience of actually, getting an EV recently. And
what did you buy?
A Polestar. And it's
which is a Chinese vehicle.
True. Yeah. Now, I mean, it's Volvo, but yes, through the. But the point quickly is that. This didn't occur to me until actually I went to drive. I live in Seattle, and I went to drive to speak at an event up in Vancouver, which, I could have gotten to Vancouver on a full charge, but I wouldn't have been able to get home, so I had to work in, where am I going to charge? And it's something I had never thought about before because gas stations are so ubiquitous. And that now, all of a sudden, without having the availability or the option to pull into any gas station anywhere along that route, that are all set up to serve, the petrol-powered cars, I had to plan my route in a different way. That was just this like, aha, this is going to be a bigger challenge to get the global community to make this shift, even if the infrastructure was available overnight.
And continuing on that user experience theme, certainly you experienced the challenge of just finding charging stations. But then even if you find charging stations, sometimes they're not necessarily in the most convenient or hospitable locations. And certainly I'm sure, Robin, you've probably had some experiences with chargers that are maybe not where you might want to be if you're on your own. I know even I certainly have. Or if you are towing a vehicle with, say, an F-150 Lightning or a Rivian, or if you're towing a trailer, the way the experience for charging is set up today is really not hospitable for a great user experience. Anybody want to chime in on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to just add. I mean, we did a study recently with Gensler. I mean, you're basically taking a mobility design company with an architectural design company, and these are typically two worlds that don't come together, which is stupid, really, in a way, because we're designing systems to operate next to each other, but not with each other. So we broke apart the paradigms that we'd been working in and started to think about, okay, as we move forward, where are the opportunities? If you take away what we know today and then rebuild the world with new technologies like autonomous, connected, electric, services, and shared, what kind of experiences could we imagine? And where we got to, it's a big study. You can look it up online. It's called Architecture Times X Mobility. But one of the key things was a place called the Nth Space. And the Nth Space is this place where you go to. It's neither work nor home, but it's a place where you can go maybe in the suburbs rather than making that journey into work. I mean, what's happened since we did this study, the work from home phenomenon has kicked in. So people aren't making as many journeys, but they still want to connect. But anyway, what came out of this was this opportunity for gas stations. There's 180,000 gas stations in the US, right? That if we get to 50% utilization or electric vehicle sales, they've got to rethink their business models. Now, guess what? All these gas stations are in very key locations in metro areas on routes you need to take and so forth. So what if we start to think of that business model and say, take the gas station and let them rethink their business model where they're adding the value during the 10 minutes or the 30 minutes charging time and can generate more revenue by thinking of different experiences they can provide.
Can I say something? So interesting, and I'll riff off of something that Neil said a little earlier. You know, you look at the resistance to EVs today by the US consumer, at least. This is playing out differently around the globe, but it's really around, you know, as Neil said, range, charging speed, and then charger availability. One of the things that isn't lost on me is, you know, if you look at JD Power's data, they show that they did a survey for Q1 of this year, and 1 in 5 chargers in America doesn't work. 21% of chargers don't work. So that could be that they're literally offline, or the software handshake to the vehicle doesn't work, et cetera. So you've got a US consumer who may be buying an EV for the first time and then finds 1 in 5 times when I go to a charger, it doesn't work at all. If you compare that against the Tesla network, only 4% of Tesla chargers don't work. So you start to understand why many of the legacy automakers who are starting to build EVs in the US are moving very quickly to adopt the Tesla charging standard. The other thing that I'll say is, yes, we're sitting at about 7 or 8% of all passenger vehicles that are EVs today. And one might argue that we haven't had enough supply of EVs to really test what demand is. We've had a kind of a shortage. Well, that's going to flip very quickly. In fact, if you look at the inventory sitting on dealership lots today, new car inventory, there's about twice as much supply, days supply of EVs than there are ICE vehicles, and that's only going to build over the next 9 months. You know, Automotive News says we've got about 130 new EV models coming in the next 2 years. So we are going to test what consumer demand is. I suspect, and if you want to take one nugget home today, is that if you or any of your loved ones are in a market to buy an EV, just wait 9 months, there will be screaming deals. Screaming deals. In some cases, some of the automakers will literally be giving these EVs away, because we in the US at least are going to oversupply EVs, especially in certain segments. And it's going to be a really good time to be a buyer if you want to buy an EV in the next year. Just wait a few more months.
Anyone else have any thoughts?
I guess one thought. Well, sunk cost now. But one thought is taking a step back from the consumer kind of angle on this, and actually thinking about it from the public sector, or let's talk about just cities' role in kind of managing or regulating isn't the right word, but overseeing part of the investment that's going on in EV infrastructure at the city level. And this gets back to the issue you raised around reliability. So if at a national level we're investing $7+ billion in EV charging infrastructure across the country, some of that is going into charging infrastructure at the city level as well. And that charging system is going to be provided by multiple providers. And yet, multiple providers right now, from an accountability perspective, they're not speaking the same language from a data perspective. And I'm not even talking about the way they project their availability or pricing or locations to the public. Just talking about it from the perspective of the public accountability of the dollars being spent in this infrastructure. How do we ensure from the city perspective that if I'm investing in 6 EV charging systems, a lot of this is curbside, or maybe it's in a public parking lot, and it's how am I able to assess across those 6 different providers what the uptime? Are they meeting my uptime requirements? Are they all actually available when they say, or what is their utilization? Did I just make an investment in a system that isn't in fact being utilized when this one over here is? So this is an area where that standard language, the curb data specification, as we call it with the OMF, can actually kind of equalize the way that information is shared from a kind of public investment perspective.
So let's step back a little bit from charging infrastructure and get back a little more to the broader ecosystem, to achieve some of the goals, of greater equity and accessibility of transportation and mobility. We need to actually get fewer personally owned vehicles, fewer individually owned vehicles on the road to reduce congestion, improve safety. Where do we need to make investments? What do we need to invest in order to get a more equitable mobility ecosystem?
So I think it depends on the definition of we here, I suppose. So there's kind of a role for different actors along the maybe TRL, CRL spectrum. So early stage, I think, is happening in some private investments, as well as in entities like the Federal Transit Administration that have done like their mobility sandbox and the next iterations of that. And I think they're looking to get back into fostering support more for that end of the tech readiness spectrum. So there's kind of discrete points of like the we that needs to invest is public, the we that needs to invest is private, the we that needs to invest is maybe a little bit of both. But I think where there needs to be maybe some more attention for the ecosystem is blurring geographic boundaries, solutions that enable maybe sharing of assets. A good example of this is the NeoRide partnership in the Midwest. And I think Kurt Conrad from SARTA is here somewhere, one of the members. That's an opportunity not just for like shared purchasing power if they're looking to use the same mobility provider or adopt the same technology, but by integrating their systems, if someone needs a ride or there's a user that has a need that can't best be served by their actual home agency, it enables them to then use a different vehicle from a neighboring agency to fulfill that need. So it's optimizing on a much larger scale than just within individual operations. And then, Andrew, you made a point earlier about capacity at cities. And there's a lot of investment, I think, that needs to happen pre-implementation stage, needs assessment, capacity building. Cities are not really in a position to take advantage of the billions, trillions of dollars that are going toward public investment, and we're seeing some programs that are actually undersubscribed. The Safe Streets and Roads for All last NOFO round, in the action plan sort of capacity building feasibility stage was undersubscribed by $200 million. So they expanded eligibility, they're bridging the gap in piloting things that inform or refine an action plan. But to get to, we're gonna put these things in the ground and that's, they're implementation ready, there's a huge delta for many of these cities from where they are today to being able to even take advantage of the public funds that are out there.
Okay, I'll give more of a private enterprise point of view. Now, we've been working with, and BMW itself is a partner with Lacey out in Los Angeles. And Robin, I think you and I probably face the same issues with congestion, being out in LA. When you think about LA, which is where our studio is in Santa Monica, there really isn't a great deal of option for the current drivers in terms of taking their car to work or getting to where they want to. Metro's coming along, things are improving, and of course we've got to start thinking about the Olympics in 2028, how we're going to move people around. But right now, we have this issue of congestion, and we've got to think about how do we get people out of the cars. It's a very complex topic. We're also doing studies, BMW, this is, doing studies with UC Davis and Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, where we're looking at it's called the car dependency study, if you want to look it up. You start to look at the people who want to drive, who own a car and want to drive a car, and then opposed to that, you've got a group that don't really want to own a car, but they have to because they have no option of how to get around. So there you've got an inequality situation that maybe through things like road pricing, I think someone was talking about it this morning, you can take road pricing to subsidize other means of transportation in other areas to make it more equitable. So those people who want to drive their car get to drive their car, but they're also subsidizing others who don't want to do that. So it's thinking around these sort of models, and then of course LA itself is looking at these urban mobility hubs for enabling this exchange that you were talking about earlier. If I get to the mobility hub in my car, but then I need to exchange into a micro-mobility solution for the last last 3 miles. That's another area that we can invest in to try to come up with some different solutions, I think.
Like, if we want to make mobility, transportation more equitable, we would dramatically increase the investment in public transit and rethink the way our transit systems work in cities, and actually treat public transit and public transit users as a respectable choice of travel, which it currently is not thought of in most, certainly American cities, more so than other cities globally. Even things like, then it very quickly parlays into safety. Is it actually safe to walk to the bus or train stop? Do you feel safe when you're on that bus or train? Can you walk safely to, shifting away from public transit slightly, but is it safe to walk or ride your bike as a child to school? I mean, these issues are very much linked, and I think it's funny when we have entire conferences that think about how do we create more equitable transportation systems, how do we create safer transportation systems. We know the answers, we're just not willing to do it.
Sorry, I'm just going to pick up on this. I think also just redefining what transit is. You kind of said shifting away from transit, looking at bikes. City Bike in New York City provides more rides than BART, but it's not quote unquote transit. The FTA's definition looks at temporally shared, so like we'd be in the same mode together, but if we go to the same dock at different times and take out our own bike for our own rides, that's not considered to be transit. So I think it's a little bit of a mindset shift too of what these systems are providing in terms of public good, and that the different form factors are helping address getting people out of cars or serving the need for that particular trip. Even if a car could, maybe they want to bike or they don't like driving, or like I live in the city, I don't own a car, but I have all these other options. I'm fortunate, I have all these other options available to me, but something like a bike share system is not considered to be transit. So the funding that's allocated for transit systems isn't applicable to those kinds of modes.
We've only got a few minutes left here. Some final thoughts on what are the biggest challenges? I know you can get this out in 30 seconds each, right? What are the biggest challenges that we face to making all of this a reality? Steve?
Well, I'll come back to Sam, something that you said earlier. I think it's really like technology partnerships, right? So I think of the utopia would be, yes, we would have a lot more top-down funding available for public transport. I grew up in Toronto, and juxtaposing Toronto's transit system versus where I am now in Atlanta, it's night and day, right? So I mean, it was amazing how you could very effectively, like you could in LA, I'm sure, in Santa Monica, live without a car and never miss the vehicle at all. In Atlanta, it just would not work. But I think that Sam, you said something earlier that really resonates with me, which is we need to have everyone be able to open up their data to each other. And when I'm on public transport, I should be able to make a decision when I get off of a train. Do I take a bus? Do I hop on some sort of micromobility medium? Do I hop in an Uber? What is best for me? I mean, I'm a habitual Uber user, but Uber may not always be the best choice for me when I end up in a city. If there was an app that would help me understand, should I take the train into the city, whether I'm in Chicago or San Francisco, I struggle with that. My default is to go with Uber, which I know is not accessible to a big percentage of Americans today. So I think it is a challenge, but I think we need to not only have more funding available, but also more collaboration, perhaps, through from these different companies and these different modalities.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to the customer experience here, for the user experience, is that this has got to be an added value, not a takeaway. And I think you hear a lot of rhetoric about, well, I have to give up this, I have to give up that. Just a real quick comment on taking transit, for example. I'm from England originally. I lived in.
We wouldn't have guessed.
No, okay. Well, I'm not Australian. I lived in Brighton. I wouldn't dream of taking a car from Brighton to London. I just wouldn't. It's too difficult, and I can use my time wiser on the train journey up there. I can't do the same in LA, and that to me is an issue. Whether that's because the routes aren't there, or just because the experience isn't where it needs to be. We've got to address these sort of issues, I think. And then the other learning, I guess, from the work that we did with Gensler is that we've got to do this together. You know, there's boundaries, there's gates, there's so many different things that we've got to take on together to solve this, basically. It's not just coming out of mobility, it's not just coming out of government, it's not just coming out of architecture, it's not coming out of energy. We've all got to work together.
Andrew?
I'll come back to this concept of ecosystem, because as much as I sort of highlighted public transport, you know, Robin, your point about bikes is spot on, but it's actually, you know, really a multimodal ecosystem. And you know, living in Seattle, even with, you know, two, you know, growing kids, I was able to live in the city. We had one car, and really we were able to do that because we had public transport options. We had sort of dockless options. At a time, we had an incredibly robust car share program. And car share is actually the single mode of transport that I credit with keeping us a one-car household, because it really allowed us to utilize this shared asset. And you know, it was a car, but it meant we didn't have to own and take on the cost and the burden of additional car ownership. And yet, unfortunately, that robust car share program ended up kind of crumbling or kind of around us as, you know, unfortunately BMW, one of them, which offered amazing cars. It was great to drive 3 Series, but you know, 3 Series I don't think ended up penciling in the end of the day financially. But that car share mode was an incredibly important piece of that ecosystem that allowed not just my household, but many households to go either car-free or car-less.
That's a great example. And I said earlier, I'm not anti-car. It has a place, in certain use cases. I think one of the challenges that I see is the ongoing support for operations. There's a lot of funding for CapEx on electrification side, on transit side. But to actually sustain, and not just to throw money at the problem, but actually dig into financial sustainable business models, which unfortunately have sort of not been going so great in the micromobility market in particular, and plaguing a lot of companies. So that has decreased the trust and kind of had this stigma around some of those solutions, and cities are maybe less willing to partner, or it's got this negative connotation around it. So operations funding, yes, please.
And to wrap it up, you know, I love to drive. I love to take my 34-year-old Miata out on country back roads and just blast around for a couple of hours. But I hate driving in cities. It sucks. It's terrible. And you know, I would love to be able to go into any American city and have the kind of experience I had in Munich at IAA a few weeks ago, where I took the train everywhere. I bought a daily pass, and I could hop onto one train and off another. Google Maps told me exactly what train station to go in, what time the train was going to be there, what station to get off. It was a great experience, and combining that with micromobility solutions, with buses, robo-taxis even, to help fill in the gaps. All of this would be, I think, a huge boon to society. And with that, we have run out of time, and we've just barely scratched the surface of this topic. We could probably go on for many more hours. I appreciate your patience and sticking with us this afternoon. Go have a drink, enjoy yourselves, relax. And thank you to the panel, Robin Marquis, Andrew Glass Hastings, Steve Greenfield, Neil Brooker. You've been great.
Thanks for having me.